Some games go out of their way to make sure that their unique personality, their charm, their humour, their graphical style, maybe their audio style, or maybe their gameplay is unique and different. And The Many Pieces of Mr. Coup does an awful lot of this, but it does it in the right places. And what I mean by that is that it's got a striking visual art style, a bombastic soundtrack, a really clever hook, because The Many Pieces of Mr. Coup, like the art style is just like, why am I chopped into three? What's happened here? But also, it then knows to not do that with the mechanics of a good point and click adventure. And the reason why this is really crucial is that you have a completely surrealist and absurdist world to go and discover that makes very little sense that you get to play around with. But you're playing with known rules of how a point and click adventure works. So you're not having to deal with the cognitive as you scream through all of these different levels, laughing at the slapstick humour, finding the world just strange and weird and nonsensical, but revelling in that whilst knowing that you're following very trustable rules on how a point and click adventure works. In The Many Pieces of Mr. Coup, you play as Mr. Coup, and you don't start off in many pieces at the start of the game. This is a absolutely beautiful game to play, as you'll be seeing on the screen. It's a real cool mixture of two different art styles. For me, the background images do remind me a bit of Broken Sword, where it's like it's real world or like old photos that have been distressed and then painted over the top of, or like a mixture of the two. And some of the screens, they're really beautifully layered, so that as Mr. Cou's kind of walking in between different layers, you didn't realise that you're walking through painted backgrounds. It's really quite cool. Mr. Coup himself and the other characters that are moving in the game are all hand-drawn in a scruffy 1920s, 1930s way, but it's surprising how much character and personality and jauntiness and humour comes out of a very basic pared back drawing. And I know everyone loves like Cuphead for the way how that graphical style evokes vintage cartoons. This does a very similar kind of nostalgic, whimsical thing for me when I look back at this style of graphical cartoon and animation. And it's beautifully done, and it takes me back to childhood time. I can't help it. Speaking specifically of animation before I dive onto the actual gameplay elements, one of the things that popped out for me here is how the personality of the animation reminded me of silent films, in that you're able to use the physicality of the characters to evoke a like slapstick absurdist humour. And the more I played The Many Pieces of Mr. Coup, the more it aligned to me of like a silent Laurel and Hardy film. And I think it deserves great praise for that, because the parallels of the two kept going and became more parallel and aligned the further I got into the game. So, how does The Many Pieces of Mr. Coup play? Regardless of if you're on PC or console, you will be using a cursor to move around on the screen. I bought this for PS4, PS5 on cross-buy, and it's a PS5 version that you're looking at, but you can see that there's a cursor moving around the screen, pointing on different things, and it will change the cursor depending on if you can interact with different objects. My main thing with this game that I would recommend to players is to go in blind, because everything around puzzle solving is usually around visual cues, because you'll see something not quite right with the environment, or something that looks like you can pick at it or change it or pull a lever or interact with a character. And it might mean that you need to sequence events quite quickly, or do something in a certain order, or move something around so that it can then trigger something else. But the cursor will give you plenty of warning and nods in the right direction to help you get there. There's lots of animations around things not working, which again adds to the humour and the charm. But the game itself is actually quite short. But it wasn't for me, because I was going around not quite pixel hunting in this game, but enjoying all of the different interactions of the game that you could trigger, because quite a lot of them are actually tied to achievements and trophies, and sometimes reward you going off the beaten path and doing the wrong thing, which I thought was quite cool. Once you complete the game, you then unlock a kind of secondary mode where about 120, 130 pieces of concept art have been ripped up by a character and thrown throughout the game. And so you can go around with your cursor picking those up and finding all of the concept art, which all include like rough early sketches of the game being created and kind of mapped out. I thought that was a really great addition. And the other thing that I would praise this game for is its hint system. Every single screen that you're in, or the puzzle that you're currently in, has little hand-drawn sketches that tell you what you need to do if you want to use them. It rewards you with an achievement or trophy for playing the game without having to do that. But if you do get absolutely stuck, if you still haven't kind of worked it out by clicking on the environment and trying sequencing different things and triggering different moves, the hint system is actually very generous and helps you get through the levels relatively quickly. The last thing I'd say is that the level design is quite varied and different, and whilst the many pieces of Mr. Coup is definitely a game of acts where you'll have different types of puzzles, then you'll move on to a different area and then a different area, so on and so forth, they get gradually more complicated. And what Mr. Coup teaches you earlier in the game through smaller puzzles all comes together for the final area, where everything that you've done at least once beforehand comes to fruition here for a big interconnected puzzle to pull everything together and finish the narrative, hopefully pull Mr. Coup back together again so that he's not in many pieces, and you have a good ending to the game. I really enjoyed this. I had a giant soppy grin on my face all the way through. I found it engaging. I didn't find it absurdly difficult, and I thought all the puzzles were fair and relatively obvious once I'd got used to hunting for visual cues in the game. And so whilst the entire world of Mr. Coup is nonsensical and crazy and surrealist and absurd, the beauty here is that the puzzles aren't, and so it lets you just enjoy the magical world that's been created for you and not focus on what the hell do I have to do to solve this next puzzle. 2 huge thumbs up from me. Don't sleep on this. It's a classic. Higher Plane Games is part of the Higher Plane Network, a completely independent media outlet supported by people like you. The goal is to create the best possible content that cultivates a richer indie scene for games as well as music and entertainment. To find out more and to get involved, visit patreon.com/higherplane-network. Your support makes all the difference, and in return you'll gain access to bonus content and downloads. Thank you for watching.